When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. When you want to persuade someone, you have a few different strategic options, a few different cards to play. One of those emphasizes the role of the arguer more than any other tool. That is, the arguer says, "You should believe me because I have special training, like an advanced degree or years of experience, because I have a unique vantage point, I saw something with my own eyes, or perhaps you should believe me because I'm a good person, or I have your best interests in mind." In the 4th century BCE, Aristotle called this persuasive approach ethos, which is frequently reduced to appeals to personal credibility. But ethos covers so much more than that, including trust and branding. Even simple statements like, "because I said so," are really ethos appeals. "Because I said so" means both I'm in charge and I could do something to you that you really wouldn't like. Our guest today is John Thomas III, Assistant Professor of Political Science, who's originally from Nashville, Tennessee. John, tell us an argument story.
Yeah, so once we were talking earlier, I'm from Nashville. I lived in Chicago for 15 years. And so not quite at the height of the pandemic, but towards the tapering off of the pandemic, we were still doing social distancing. We were still doing masks, more or less. But by that point, vaccines were out. A good friend of mine came to visit. And he was on his way to visit someone else, and he came to visit me. And we were talking about, vaccines. He was like, "Yeah, I'm not vaccinated." And I was like, it gave me some pause because, being African-American, being involved in the church in Chicago, I had seen umpteen, rollouts of, why you're supposed to get a vaccine, hearing it from the pulpit, hearing it from, health officials, my mom who was a nurse, and then for a very dear friend of mine to tell me that he wasn't going to get a vaccine as we're sitting, eating Giordano's, because we had to do Giordano's for the tourist value. It just kind of gave me pause. And so we were talking about it, and it just really, I think he was part of a union. The union negotiated, that they didn't have. By this point, it wasn't mandated for them to be on site to get vaccines. Some jobs you had to be mandated to get a vaccine. It wasn't mandatory. It just gave me pause. I had not run into an anti-vaxxer within my circle. So here it was, one of my best friends from way back when, telling me he wasn't going to get a vaccine. Didn't want to hear it, wasn't going to do it, had all these arguments against it. Now, he wasn't using ivermectin, thank God, but he wasn't getting a vaccine. And then I went to visit my family in Barbados in 2022 was still, middle of vaccine time, and COVID, you still needed a COVID card to get in and out the country. And my uncle was basically like, you need to get a vaccine to get out of here, but I ain't getting no vaccine. I haven't gotten a vaccine, don't plan on it. And I'm like, how again? So a good friend of mine in Chicago and my uncle, but just hearing the conversations about why they didn't want to get vaccine really gave me pause, because these are people who I consider to be, who are smart, intelligent.
Did you think that they made any good arguments?
No. There was no good argument for getting a vaccine. There was no good argument. But to hear the media spiel about why you shouldn't get vaccine coming from these people's mouths, well articulated, everything from we don't know what the government's doing, or people haven't died, or whatever. I'm like, oh my God, you were spitting me these things from the friends, and y'all don't want. It was like, wow, I felt like I was listening to like a Republican National Committee video. I was like, what is this? I was in shock. And these were like a family member and a good friend. So it really was jarring.
And these are not members of the RNC, I take it?
No. These, it's just, but they were like, and then reflecting on, because one of the things that's happened, in discourse is these echo chambers. You talk about stuff, but the fact that my uncle had died from COVID very early on in New York, before, he was older gentleman, 80-ish, and, he was in New York, and New York was ground zero. And literally there was a group of older men who got together to play dominoes. They were all wiped out.
Wow.
It's gone. And remembering, my cousin not being able to go into the hospital, having to have a doctor call, like back in the early days where none of these protocols existed, having the doctor having to call her on the cell phone, and then my mother struggling to get, a burial plot, because they couldn't bury people because of the line. And then to run into a good friend and my family member who were like, well, no, we didn't get a vaccine. I'm like, what, but did you, I did not understand.
You say it gave you pause, and I've been in similar situations as well. Can you spool out what that means for you in terms of giving you pause? In other words, how did it feel? Did it make you question the relationship? Did it make you curious about them?
I did not expect that to come out of their mouths, because we had similar values, because this was a friend of mine going over, decades, because this was a family member, an uncle, my like, your brother died in the hospital in New York. You're not getting the vaccine. What is this? You sitting on the island like, nope, I don't need to do that. And it just, one, because, like I said, shared values, relationships, but on this very important public health issue, y'all have a different stance, a very different stance, which is, like, wow, I did not expect that coming from you. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like, when you find someone voted for, a candidate, a political candidate that you like, I would have never thought that you would have done that. That's interesting.
So it's both surprising in the sense of your relationship, because you had built a rapport, obviously, over many years, even your whole life with your family members. And so you think you understand who they are, and then they go and violate that expectation. Mm-hmm. And also you think, and I agree, that they were doing something dangerous. Mm-hmm. By not putting themselves at risk.
Yeah, putting me at risk. I'm sitting in this restaurant like, this man ain't got a vaccine. Mind you, we're still like, I've been doubly vaccinated, but the vaccine only attenuates the symptoms. It does not. And getting COVID, even today, even though it's come down to where it's basically feels like it is a type of influenza, a type of viral infection, you still don't want to get COVID. I finally ended up getting COVID when I was here my first semester. I had avoided Chicago, avoided it during grad school, moved to Charleston, teaching these students at CFC, and within my first semester here, I got COVID. It is not so. I had all the vaccines in the world, but I still got it, and it still wasn't a nice thing to get. But but I'm like, I can only imagine what would happen if I hadn't gotten a vaccine.
Tell me about your persuasive efforts in relationships like this. Let's say you disagreed over something trivial like sports, or something massive like vaccination and life and death. Are you the type of person to kind of stand forth and try to be persuasive and really make the case, and even in an event as a one-time thing, say, no, we're going to do this here, right now, or as a process, keep banging the drum to bring them over to your side? Or do you just say, all right, well, you're going to do you and move on with your life?
Well, see, you said something earlier, the relationship. Mm-hmm. Now, again, this is why this story stuck with me, because of how I reacted and how I am. I'm a college professor. I teach political science. I spend at least twice a week, I'm in a classroom talking about, politics. Politics is the articulation of power. It's how power is articulated and how it is used. I listen to students with arguments. I'm also teaching classes where I'm trying to explain, how things happen, and especially in this environment where we're in, where, we see norms being shredded in front of us, what is a what is a disagreement we can have versus a disagreement we should not be having? Okay, we can disagree about, policies, but then if your policy is, if you implement this, I die, that's not a disagreement. That's a death sentence. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, discussions over slavery in the United States in the 1860s. You're talking about my liberty. That's not a policy debate, and nowadays, the discussions we're having about, one candidate is saying, we're going to, throw up the walls. We're going to go after all these. I'm like, those that fail, these are gentle policy debates. If they ever existed, they're always people's lives in place. And I think one of the misnomers we have in American politics, especially, is that, this debate around policy is lives. And when people's lives are at stake, we really have to understand, what how one side can get to the point, well, what, you're being emotional. No, you're talking about whether my people live or die. So having said that, in these debates, with a good friend, with my uncle, you listen. I gave the story about my uncle. So, I had a family member who died of COVID. So that's why I got vaccinated. And that's why I will always tell that story, because I experienced a death firsthand. And, and several good friends of mine died of COVID in the early days when we didn't know what it was or when there was no way to treat it. And so, my friend was like, I respect that, but I ain't getting no vaccine. And then there comes a point when you value a relationship that you have to agree to disagree, or you have to say, this is a different than if I'm, standing on a Senate floor arguing against a proposal that could cut millions of funding to people that would mean their eventual death. This is me talking to a friend who's been a friend for years. We've been through lots of things together, and I'm not going to let a disagreement over a COVID vaccine destroy that friendship. Now, I definitely am like, okay, bro, you went to an interesting place on this one, but at some point you have to say, okay, you have to look at what's the relationship, and just like in relationships with that are romantic, there are clean ways to fight and there are dirty ways to fight. This is my friends with therapists talking, and at some point you have to say, no, you know what? We're not going to fight this, but I'm not going to hold the disagreement. I know you don't agree with me. I do not agree with you. So we'll just agree to disagree on this and move on to the next thing, which is what we did. Because, it wasn't important. It wasn't important to me to keep coming back to that on that issue. Uh-huh. Now, if it was something else, that might have, and I've known people have friendships ended over, did you get I've seen people did you get a vaccine? Did you vote for Trump? Did you keep a Confederate flag in your car? I know families that have been torn apart because of people who, rolled up into D.C. or were looking at QAnon, and that's messed up families. I thankfully haven't had that discussion, but I can understand why, at some point you may have to say, we can't, for the good of, we can't keep this relationship. But in my instance, it was like, okay, this is, I can just let this one go. But I am going to go get a COVID test when you get back on that plane.
So the lesson sort of going forward for you, it sounds like there's at least two. One, just the sheer shock and surprise that you would be in a relationship with this person and be so amazed by the conclusion they've drawn on an issue that seems so obvious to you in a life or death. But then secondly, it sounds like at least the message going forward in these kinds of circumstances with you was stay in a relationship.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily accept the other person's point of view or even tolerate it, but stay in relationship.
And that's the only thing that works. So, again, how do Democrats and Republicans, how did Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia go to the opera for years? At some point, they were able to have relationships beyond their policy differences. And I think that's one of the problems in our discourse today. People don't have relationships beyond the differences. We have nothing to bind us. All we're hearing is the red meat you're throwing at your people in a different time period. AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene may not have been the best of friends, but there might have been a passing civility because we're both congresspersons. We don't have that in this political landscape. And in fact, one person I was watching yesterday, a Republican was talking. He said, we have these people in Congress who they don't want to govern. They want to be on Fox News, and that is not helping our party, which I wholeheartedly agree. Because American democracy doesn't work when you have one party that's hijacked by people who care more about clicks and rates and likes than about actually the business of governing.
John, thank you very much for being on When We Disagree.
All right, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.